of the 2024 general elections. Yesterday I was here apologizing for keeping you for an hour. I think I've actually extended the time this time to 1 hour, 30 minutes. So I will not even attempt to apologize. You can give me my punishment. See me on the side and give me my punishment. All right. So I'm sure all of you know that a lot of developments have taken place this morning. Some very, very positive, and our co-chairs will talk about that. But without much ado, let me call Reverend to share the preliminary findings. Thank you very much again for waiting.
Once again, you are welcome to this briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, the Coalition of Domestic Election Observers, CODEO, is a coalition of 42 professional, faith-based civil society groups that deployed 4,000 trained, accredited, independent, and non-partisan rapid response observers in all 276 constituencies in Ghana's 16 regions on Saturday, September 7, 2024. CODEO employed the power of voter tabulation to deploy 1,500 of these observers to a nationally representative sample of polling stations in all 276 constituencies across Ghana's 16 regions. CODEO observers are Ghanaians from every walk of life who volunteered their time to ensure that every registered voter freely casts their ballot on election day, and that Ghanaians receive independent, non-partisan information on the conduct of these elections. The PVT methodology uses statistical principles to allow CODEO to provide credible information on the quality of the polls in Ghana. This preliminary statement represents CODEO's findings on the 2024 presidential and parliamentary elections. It updates the public on some of the information already shared in the situational and close of polls statements on December 7, 2024. The statement is based on reports from all 1,500 PVT observers covering every region and constituency. These reports detail the setup and opening of polls, voting, closing, and counting of the ballots. What is a summary of our findings? A preliminary analysis of CODEO's PVT observer reports revealed that the conduct of the December 7th presidential and parliamentary elections was guided by Ghana's electoral laws and procedures. The overall credibility of the election process was intact, notwithstanding isolated challenges. Arrival at polling stations. Upon arrival at 6 a.m., the observers reported seeing election officials present in 85% of polling stations. However, they did see officials when they arrived. They did not see officials when they arrived at 12% of the polling stations. In 33% of polling stations, observers arrived after 6 a.m. Opening of polling stations. By 7:15 a.m., only 66% of the polling stations were opened. Another 31% of polling stations opened with a slight delay between 7:16 a.m. and 8 a.m. due to the late arrival of polling staff or the absence of electoral materials. Additionally, 4% of the polling stations opened between 8:01 and 10 a.m. Regions where CODEO observed a relatively higher number of polling stations opening after 7:15 a.m., including the Northern region, that's 52% of polling stations, OT 49%, Northeast 47%, Greater Accra 44%, and Eastern 42%. Most polling stations, that's 90%, had the minimum number of election officials, that's 5. Another 10% had 1 to 4 officials present at the time of setup. In 93% of polling stations where CODEO observers were located, electoral officials respected the status of CODEO observers as Electoral Commission accredited election observers and permitted them to observe the polls upon arrival. The remaining 7% were later on allowed to observe. Set up for the polls. Women were represented among the EC officials in most of the polling stations. 1% had 5 women officials, 12% had 4 women, 63% had 2 or 3 women, and 18% had just 1 woman. However, at 6% of polling stations, CODEO observers reported no women among the EC officials. Presiding officers in 86% of polling stations were men. The remaining 40% of polling stations had women as presiding officers. 98% of polling stations were set up in a manner that allowed voters to mark their ballots in secret. 6% of all polling stations were not accessible to persons with disabilities and older people. At the time of setup, polling agents of the 2 main political parties were present in almost all polling stations, NDC at 99% and NPP at 99%. 1/3 of polling stations had agents of independent candidates, 32%, and other parties, 32%, also present. All polling stations had presidential and parliamentary ballot boxes, presidential and parliamentary ballot papers, indelible ink, validating stamps, endorsement ink, ink pads, voting screens, and voter registers. 82% had tactile ballot papers. However, in certain locations, materials arrived late, delaying the opening of polling stations. A majority of polling stations, that's 94%, had an absentee voter list. 92% had a transfer voters list. 74% had an exceptions list. 70% had a proxy voters list. And 23% had a missing voters list for registered voters whose names were not on the electoral roll at all. 74% of polling stations had at least the expected number of biometric devices, that is 2, while 26% had only 1 device. In all the polling stations, that's 100%, where CODEO observers were present, the ballot booklets had serial numbers in numeric order. CODEO observers could confirm that all the presidential and parliamentary ballot papers were empty, sealed, and in plain view before the start of voting. CODEO observers reported seeing roaming and stationed security personnel at 98% of polling stations. In terms of the number of security personnel in polling stations, CODEO observers reported that 67% had 1 station security personnel, 22 had 2, and 7% had 3 to 5 station security personnel. The police, that's 60%, topped the list of security officials deployed to the polling stations, followed by ununiformed personnel from other security forces, 44%, national security, 4%, and the Ghana Armed Forces, 3%. CODEO observers' report showed that security personnel were unarmed in 78% of the polling stations. However, 20% of the polling stations had armed security personnel. The voting process. According to our observers, election officials validated that they stamped the ballot papers before issuing them to voters in all polling stations. In 95% of polling stations, no unauthorized persons were allowed to be present during the voting. The biometric verification devices, BVD, worked perfectly in 87% of the polling stations. However, in 13% of the polling stations, the BVD malfunctioned at some point, but were later repaired or replaced. There were no significant incidents of harassment or intimidation of voters or polling officials at 97% of the polling stations. In a majority of polling stations, that's 98%, voters gave priority to the elderly, pregnant women, nursing mothers, and persons with disabilities. In 32% of polling stations, voters were allowed to vote after successfully going through manual verification. No voter was allowed to vote without going through either the biometric, that's a fingerprint, or facial or manual verification. Voters had their fingers marked with indelible ink in almost all polling stations. That's 97% according to our observers. Voters were permitted to have people of their choice assist them in voting in 97% of the polling stations. Biometric verification devices rejected more than 5 voters in 10% of the polling stations. Closing and counting. According to our observers, no harassment or intimidation of polling officials, agents, or observers during the counting of 97. There was no such thing in 98% of the polling stations. In nearly all polling stations, party or independent candidates agents were permitted to observe the count, while in 99% of polling stations, unauthorized individuals were not permitted into the inner perimeter of the place where the vote was being counted. There was sufficient light in 87% of polling stations during the counting process. In 94% of polling stations, no party's candidate agent, including those of independent candidates, requested a ballot recount. In 90% of polling stations, presiding members did not make any mistakes in the result sheets. However, in the remaining 10% of the polling station, where such errors occurred, the presiding officers either countersigned or corrected the result sheets on separate sheets. The presiding officers consistently endorsed the presidential result declaration forms. 99% of political party agents at polling stations and all presiding officers at the polling stations signed the parliamentary results declaration form. In 98% of the polling stations, presiding officers gave copies of the signed result sheets to party candidate agents. In most polling stations, that's 89%, election officials posted the presidential election results announced at visible places for the public to see. From the foregoing, CODEO confidently confirms that the EC's arrangement from setup to counting ballots at polling stations were generally adequate and credible. Selected PVT projections. As at midnight of December 7, CODEO had received results from all PVT nationally representative samples of polling stations. That's the 1,500 located in every region and constituency of Ghana. Thus, CODEO's data has stabilized, making it possible to have PVT estimates for the presidential elections. CODEO will release its PVT estimates after the EC completes its constitutional duty of announcing the official results of the presidential election. The PVT will provide an impartial verification of the official presidential election results announced by the EC. Meanwhile, from our PVT provisional estimates, CODEO projects voter turnout at 63.9%, plus or minus 0.5%, and rejected ballot rates at 2.1%, plus or minus 0.1%, respectively. Reported incidents, fast-checking of misinformation. As at 10 a.m. today, CODEO observers reported and confirmed 228 incidents during the opening, voting, and counting stages of the polling process across the country. The most common incidents included intimidation or harassment, violence, vote buying, bribery, unauthorized presence of at polling stations, and violations of voting or counting procedures. The CODEO midday situational report and close of poll statements issued yesterday, December 7, captured some of these incidents. CODEO particularly notes the worrying incident which took place at some polling stations in various constituencies such as Awutu Senya East, Obuasi East, and Ododo Diodo and Okankwe South, Ahafano, Damongo, and Awutu Senya East. At the GPRTU Office 3 polling station in Ododo Diodo, for instance, some individuals physically assaulted a CODEO youth observer performing his observation duties at the polling station. Other violent incidents also reportedly took place at collation centers in constituencies such as the Awutu Senya East, Ahafano North, Ablekuma West, Okankwe South, Ahafano, and Damongo. CODEO noted other violations at constituency collation centers, such as assaults against poll officials and destruction of electoral materials. Some of these incidents took place in constituencies such as Ekwetia, German North, Daboya, Mankarigu, Okankwe Central, Tano South, Karachi West, and Elembele. CODEO notes that in some of these reported cases, election officials and security agents were able to swiftly resolve the issues, while in others, investigations have commenced. Commendation and acknowledgement. CODEO commends Ghanaians, CODEO observers, the Electoral Commission, the Election Security Task Force, the media, political parties and candidates, domestic and international observers, and all Ghanaians for the generally peaceful conduct of the polls. CODEO further commends the early concession of defeat by the presidential candidate of the New Patriotic Party. CODEO reminds all stakeholders that the process is still ongoing. Therefore, they should allow the Electoral Commission to conclude and formally declare results for both elections. While election day procedures were in line with the legal framework, CODEO remains concerned with the trend of voter inducement observed during the campaign period and through election day, which undermines the ability of Ghanaians to freely express their choice in the ballot box. CODEO appreciates various international observer groups that support Ghana's electoral and democratic process, particularly those that visited the CODEO National Information Center during the exercise. We commend the National Peace Council, the media, the political parties, voters, and citizens for their respective complementary roles. Finally, CODEO acknowledges the general support of its partners, including the American people, through the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the National Democratic Institute, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and the UK government, the European Union, and ECOWAS. In conclusion, CODEO continues to observe the post-election vote counting and results collation process, with observers deployed to all 276 constituency collation centers, all the 16 regional collation centers, and the National Resource Collation Center in Accra. In addition, CODEO has received data from all 276 constituencies that voted on Saturday, December 7, 2024, completed the analysis, and has its PVC estimates for the presidential results ready. In keeping with our protocols, CODEO will release its PVT estimates for the presidential election results following the official announcement by the EC to provide independent verification of the latter's accuracy. Thus, the CODEO PVT is a powerful tool to ensure that the presidential results announced by the EC reflect the ballots cast at the polling stations across Ghana. We wish to express our sincere gratitude to the thousands of volunteers who dedicated their time to ensure that Ghana again went through this democratic exercise of electing new leaders to govern the country for the next 4 years. Thank you for your kind attention. I invite our Director of Advocacy so that if you have any questions, comments, we'll be able to give any input that we can. Join me to welcome Dr. Kojo Asante.
Okay, we are open to take any questions. Okay. Yes, Reverend James Lai.
I don't want the no question scenario repeated. Could you tell us what their rating is of the work of the Electoral Commission? Thank you.
Are there any other questions that we can take, and then board members can speak to it? All right. Okay. All right. So I think the speaks for itself, but Reverend, I don't know if you want to add anything. The ratings for the Electoral Commission, and remember, the process is not over. The Electoral Commission still has to formally collate all the results, constituency, regional, and then the final national collation and declaration. So I I think there's still something that we are watching. But he wanted to know what our ratings of the Electoral Commission. I think some of it is reflected in the statement.
Well, I think I can only agree with him. I don't think I need to add anything more. We complement or supplement the work of the EC, and they as the owners of the process will come out with their findings. So we are watching and we are waiting. In the meantime, I think the atmosphere has been affected by considerably by the concession speech. So at least the temperature has gone down a little bit, but we know that by law and by obligation of duty and office, the EC must finish and give a definitive result from which, if we want to say anything, interrogate those things, we take it from their report. Ours has its own value, but we are waiting for theirs as well.
Okay. Thank you. Was there any question? Yeah? Okay.
Voilà, j'ai une question. Et je vais commencer par dire bravo au CODEO pour la qualité des données qui ont été présentées ici.
I want to start congratulating CODEO for the quality of data that have been provided.
Voilà, ma question est de savoir quelles seront les dimensions au niveau desquelles seront partagés l'ensemble des rapports d'observation qui seront produits par le CODEO.
My question is to know at what level will be disseminated all the results by CODEO.
Et ça, ce seraient les rapports post au niveau avant les élections, pendant les élections et après les élections. Donc l'ensemble des rapports qui vont porter sur l'observation électorale de la période.
And also if those results will concern the pre-evaluation and the post-evaluation, also during the election period.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think it's a very important point, and as election observers, we've had an opportunity to discuss this. You know, how much effort do we put in disseminating some of these results to the grassroots through our membership? And I think often when we are done with this process, we do convene a post-election workshop, you know, over a couple of days. We bring some of our observers, our coordinators together to review and assess, you know, the work we have done, and try to disseminate it, you know, through the media and through our organizations. But I think there's room to do even more, and to really give particularly our membership organizations an opportunity for themselves to engage, you know, with the data that we have produced from our observation. And I don't think we've done that enough. So I'm sure it's something that the advisory board, we can discuss some more, how best to disseminate this information. So thank you very much for flagging that, I think, very important point. I think it's also important to note that the PVT is not just about the results. And all throughout from yesterday and today, we've been giving you statistics on all the processes. So when we go through the processes and you're able to see the quality with which the election processes or rules and procedures have been complied with, it's much easier for all of us to have faith in the outcome of the elections. And I'll just point out to you some of them. So if you have, for example, in so in 99% of political party agents at polling stations and all presiding officers at the polling stations sign parliamentary declarations and also presidential results. That already gives you some confidence in the type of data that we are taking from the polling station. And then if you see that in 98% of the polling stations, presiding officers gave copies of the signed result sheets to party agents. Again, that gives you confidence about the fact that all parties have access to the results. 89% officials posted presidential election results at visible places for the public to see. So these data is very, very helpful. You know, whether materials were there, the BVD machines worked. So if you've gone through all of that process and you counted, everybody signed it, then the results are, you know, really of good quality. So just wanted to make that point as well, that the PVT is not just about the results, but also the quality of the process. Right. Yeah.
When it is, in terms of the dissemination, when it is finalized, these documents, among other things that CODEO does, will be on the website and all social media handles. So anybody who cares to find out more will know where to go, either live or, and if you have any questions or comments, you contact the CODEO, we'll be able to give you some feedback. So it's not limited to this room and to Ghanaians only, but to stakeholders anywhere who are interested as researchers or people who want information to see how we do things in Ghana and our contribution towards the free, fair, credible elections are available globally through the social media handles.
Hello. Hi. Very loud, okay. Amnesty International Ghana, Genevieve Partington. Were there any incidences of gender-based violence that you were able to record, any specific ones? And could you just kindly go over the women's representation of EC officials again? I didn't hear the percentage. And then lastly, maybe unrelated to CODEO, but it would be interesting to know of the news about the unidentified gentleman that was arrested at the Ayawaso West Wogon Coalition Center that was caught trying to bring in ballot boxes. I don't know if you heard about that, but it was a very, I was worried for him because he was kind of cornered and the police had a very difficult time securing him and trying to get him out of the building to safety so that they can investigate. So if you have any news on that, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think just to go over the statistics on women representation. So 1% of polling stations had 5 women officials. 12% had 4 women officials. 63% had 2 or 3 women, and then 18% had 1. And then at 6% of polling stations, there were no women among the EC officials. And then presiding officers, 86% were men, 14% were women. So that's the statistics. There's been a number of incidents related to the collation process. Quite a tall list, mostly in the evening, yesterday. And we're tracking some of them. Some people have been arrested, some, some led to suspensions, but I think at least from some of the information I've gotten, most of that collation process has now started. We will track all of these issues from now. We also do deploy observers for 1 month after the declaration of the results. So we keep tracking the process and sharing our findings with stakeholders so that if actions are needed to be taken. But I think there's one thing that we are all very clear about. We really need to find a solution to the whole collation center process, because this is every election is getting worse. So it's one of the things that I think we need to look at again. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Mule.
My name is Samuel Adoba. I work with TV Africa. Please, thanks for this report. And my question has to do with a recommendation. Is there any recommendation to Electoral Commission and also the entire country? Because the next 4 years, there will be another election. And where do you think we need to improve in order to improve our electoral system? Thank you very much.
Let me ask so that I can be able to take them together. This is Mule from Kenya. First, I don't envy you, of course. I know what you're going through. First is a correction. In the screen before you came in, we had the voter turnout figure at 65 point something. So in the statement, you read 63. So you need that correction. Secondly, with the political parties having given their verdict, and from the PVT results, it is indicative that 99% of their agents were all over. So that would mean they're practically everywhere. So it would be, I don't know whether you would speak about it right now or after the official results, but it would be important or interesting to listen to the confidence levels over the kind of results they have been able to churn out from their own, what they're calling strong rooms. So either in the end of the process, once the official results come out, it will be interesting to hear what are the confidence levels that people, the public, because right now the information is in the public, people are celebrating, and there are those people who are very disappointed. So CODEO could speak to that at some point, so that it's part of the, strengthening the institutions within the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mule. Let me take the two and I'll take Mr. Divine. I think that, that's why I think the process data is very, very important. One other indication is that Dr. Mahmoud Baumia conceded. The Electoral Commission hasn't finished its collation, so the only basis on which he could have conceded would have been based on his own party's collation of the results from the polling station. So I think that itself is confidence that they've already collected, because everybody is giving copies of the result sheet and all of that. Some of the challenges we are having at collation center is mostly related also to the parliamentary contestation, particularly when the gaps are very small. So some of that will still continue, and we need to manage that. Just a correction on the turnout figures. So yes, what I've read is the correct one. I think in the infographic, there was a mistake in that, but the vote turnout is 63.9%, plus or minus 0.5 percentage points, right? And then the rejected ballot rate is 2.1%, plus or minus 0.1 percentage points, right? And then the question about electoral reform. So recommendations, we normally, as I said, in the first quarter of next year, we hold our post-election workshop to review all the processes of the election with stakeholders, and that's where we generate the recommendations. And since the electoral petition in 2013, we've always set up an election reform monitoring group, an advocacy group, to then track key electoral reforms over the period. And we did the same in the last 2-3 years before this election. And even this time around, we're going to even start early. So Definitely we will get recommendations of a full process. The process is still not over, and we need to conclude it. So that's something that we will be doing, and try to make sure that we can mitigate some of the challenges the perennial challenges that we are having with our elections. Was there any other question? I think it's a Divine. Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Divine Kroenti of Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Center. Now, in 2020, we heard that 8 people were killed during the polls. And so far in 2024, we've heard of 2 deaths. Now, what is CODEO doing about this? Thank you.
So we actually undertook a project to track the processing of all of those cases, that the fatalities that we had in 2020. We worked on that for, I think almost 2 years at Rampa, chasing everybody, Attorney General's office, the police, even working with the families to ensure that the justice system, was kept active. In spite of those interventions, we haven't still not concluded on any of those cases, and we've now had 2 deaths. If there's anything we should learn, I think if we don't find justice and fairness for these kinds of incidents when they happen in elections, then it becomes a justification for people to mobilize and build narratives to take on, take their own justice when the opportunity comes. So we've already committed that not just those cases, but even all the electoral offenses that have been recorded in this election, vote buying and so on, people have been arrested. Are we just going to let it go like we do with every election, come back and complain about it again? If there's no accountability, we are not going to be able to reform and make our electoral process even more credible. So we are already committed to do our part to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes of the past. Whoever the perpetrators are, they have to be held accountable for the fatalities. That's the only way you deter people from these kinds of things. But also, what kind of processes that we have to put in place to mitigate against some of these fatalities and injuries. So those are things that we also have to take up. But yeah, I think it's a blot on Ghana's processes, electoral processes. Thank you. All right. Okay, thank you very much. It's still a Sunday, so have a very happy Sunday, and we will continue to watch the process. Thank you very much.